Professor Wen will be really happy that this is going to be easy to summarize. Okay? In fact, it's a no-brainer. Because we know that in Skopos theory, the dominant factor in a translation is its purpose. And purpose is by translation of Skopos, which just means goal. All right? And it stands to reason that machine translation can't see different purposes. It just sees text and renders text. Therefore, Skopos theory will prove to us that human translators still have a future. Okay? And that's all we have to say. I can go home. You can go home. Okay, that's the basic interest of Skopos theory from the perspective of machine translation. Now, I'm worried about whether or not that's true. Okay, number one. And I have some critical remarks to make about Skopos theory itself. Okay, so I'm not abandoning the basic translation theory part, but I'm going to do it in a slightly different way from yesterday. I will argue, here's the menu, that Skopos theory is not a theory, but I'm not the only one to argue that. I'll argue that the concept of Skopos is a reductive essentialism. It's a simplistic category, like the ones in Saussure, like the ones that were being critiqued yesterday. Okay? And I will also argue that it has no ethics. I could even go further. I will finish by arguing, in fact, that purposes are textual and are something that needs to be interpreted like any text. Okay, so that's the menu. That's where I'm going. In general terms, though, I should make it very clear that I agree with the basic principles of these theorists. My reservations have to do with their role in translation studies. I think these people have come in with some very good things to say, but they failed to create a research paradigm. That is, truth is revealed, there's nothing more to discover, so no research has really been done within this paradigm, and they failed to address the ethics question adequately. There is no code of ethics based on Skopos that I know, and it does contradict most of the codes of ethics that our professional associations have. So it's somehow, yes, very good, but in translation studies and in training programs, we need a bit more. Okay? So I'm not going to say these people are evil or nasty or not clever. Skopos theory really dates from 1984, although Hans Vermeer, who's the man on the left there, announced the principles as early as 1978. The fundamental text is this one. It's just foundations of or for a general theory of translation. It has been translated into English and Spanish. And it's co-written with Katerina Reis, who is the woman on the right. Both have unfortunately passed away. It goes along with another book which is less frequently discussed within the paradigm, but I do want to mention it. Juster Holtz-Mentering, a German working in Finland, wrote a book in the same year, Translatorisches Handeln, which is translatory action. And she announced action theory applied to translation in terms that are very similar to the other book of the same year. So it's sort of split, and I hasten to mention that the fundamental idea that a translation is determined by its purpose and by its client and its reader was announced in 1953 by a Russian theorist called Sobolovsky. Okay? And he had the misfortune of not being translated into any other language. In fact, he was translated into French, and it said that the French says a translation is conditioned by its destination. which means not much. Okay, and so it never happened. So it wasn't sort of discovered here for the first time. The idea had been kicking around in some parts of translation theory, but Hans Vermeer, that man there, was very good at branding it and getting this cool Greek term, Skopos, instead of saying the normal terms for goal or aim, Zweck, Ziel. I mean, the terms do exist in German, but he was very good at branding it and picking fights and fighting with the equivalence people, and it was quite scandalous. In Germany, in the 1980s and into the 1990s, these fights between Skopos yes, Skopos no, determined things like who gets jobs, who becomes a professor. It was full-on, heavy-duty academic debate at the time, and quite nasty as well. Now, what's interesting, given the climate in which it occurred, 1984, what's really strange is that this first book here is written in two halves. And the first half is written by Katharina Heiss, and she has a nice theory that says the way you translate is determined by the text type. Okay, so basically she has three text types: the expressive text, expressing the first person; the conative, or appellbetonte, the text that has to have an effect on the second person, okay, advertisement, for example; and then the referential text, the third person text. And she says, quite calmly and logically, well, you have to figure out the type of text, and once you know the type of text, then you can figure out how to translate it. And that was a great theory. It wasn't new. She announced that in 1978 in a book, a little book, and I think it was a really nice theory. Text, it's all in the text. And then you turn the page and you get to the second half of the book, and then Vermeer is saying, and he says, oh, no, the Skopos rule, the first thing is not the text type, it's the purpose. And the purpose can override the text type. And there's a revolution, a change of paradigm in the same book. I don't know how these people agreed to write the book together. Or Katharina Heiss didn't know what he was saying, or he didn't know what she was saying, but somehow in this same book you've got a very clever equivalence-based approach, followed directly by a revolutionary, forget about equivalence, forget about text type, purpose, client, new approach. Okay? I'm interested in how that happened, and I'm also interested in whether it happened. Okay, I'll just leave a little question mark there over the historical method. Vermeer's project prospered very well because it answered a question that equivalence theory couldn't answer. In equivalence theory, I accept that there is equivalence. I accept, for me, as you realized yesterday, for me, equivalence is a fiction underpinned by power. No, I don't think there is any substantial, but it's certainly socially operative. Okay? Now, equivalence can say, you can translate this like this, this, or this. That's equivalent, that's equivalent, that's equivalent. It can't tell me which one to choose. How can I select the best operative equivalent? The theory can't. This theory can. It can say, when you're faced with a choice between 2, 3, 4, or n, think of the purpose, and the purpose will guide you to select the right one. Very beautiful, very needed, didn't have to contradict equivalence if you thought about it. So it answered that very basic and very practical question. So, you know, when you're teaching and all these students come up to you after and say, oh, which one do I put here? I don't know how to decide this. Should I do domesticating or foreignizing? What? And you can always say, within this paradigm, it depends. It depends on what? Depends on the purpose. So what's the purpose? Go and look. Okay. What's the purpose is the key question. here's the way they were thinking. Remember I gave these silly little diagrams yesterday?
Yes.
Of the people. So somebody sending a message to somebody, again with equivalence. Skopos is basically adding that question mark. What's the purpose here? What's the purpose here? Okay? It's also raising the possibility that that purpose need not be the same as that purpose. And in fact, they say the more general case is that the translation is being done in a new time, for a new readership, and therefore probably for a new purpose. Not always, but we must allow that there is a new purpose. So this is a possibility that the equivalence paradigm never really took on. Equivalence assumes that the function here, the purpose here, is the same as the function or purpose over there. And here I'm using function and purpose interchangeably at this level. Okay? So they ask that question, is it really the same? And very often you'll find it is not. Therefore, we move translation into new fields to do quite exciting new kinds of tasks. Equivalence meant same function. In German, Funktionskonstant. And most translations have a new function for a new receiver, as I said. This means equivalence is not wrong, it's just a special case. And the previous theory could be nested within this new theory, which is just provides a bigger box. It's quite logical and calm and commonsensical. So I don't know why these Germans were fighting each other for 10 years. But that's the way academic politics works, I'm afraid. Now, this means, before I go to, okay, yeah, whatever. Okay. The basic claim, then, is this Skopos rule. This is quoted from Vermeer. The dominant factor in a translation is its purpose. On the back of one of Vermeer's books, he claims to have dethroned the source text. You understand the word to dethrone? That means to remove a king. That means a revolution. Take off that one and put your thing at the top, the purpose. Okay, it's a revolutionary claim, despite the nesting that I've just pointed out. Okay, this means that whatever the translator does is legitimate as long as it achieves the purpose. So it's not going to say always use foreignization or you always use domestication or any of the other things that I listed. So whatever it takes to achieve the purpose. It also means that the translator becomes an expert who decides on the basis, who decides on the purpose or decides how to translate on the basis of not just the text, but the instructions received from the client. The instructions is the word I'm using now because that's what clients use, instructions. Vermeer in English uses commission, like a painter would have a commission. Paint me a painting to fill that wall and to show my wife looking beautiful. Oh, okay, I'll do that. Okay, that's your broad commission. A brief is usually used with lawyers. Okay, I'm being sued for $1 million for bad teaching. I go to a lawyer, I give the brief, get me out of this please, but only spend $100,000. Okay, so that's the brief. So the German term is actually Auftrag, which is all of those, all right? How you translate, it's just the instructions that the client gives to the translator. Okay? Now those instructions may be the purpose, but may not. It depends a lot on the theorist you're reading, and I'll come to that in a minute. Okay? Okay, I'll just, before I go there, I'll point out some of the practicalities. I can't go there, all right. At the time, let me see, I was in the Canary Islands. Gee, Before going, and that's right, in 1989 to 1992, I was in the Canary Islands, and I had a German colleague there who had been Hans Vermeer's research assistant. So she was a dedicated Skopos person, okay? A scoper. And she would every day, Daddy, you tell us supposed to do this, and you figure out the purpose, and what's the brief, and do the text analysis. And she would come in frequently and she'd say, how do you say this in English? And you say, oh, I've got the, how do you say, for example, Auftrag? How do you say Auftrag in English? And I'd say, Heidrun. What's the purpose? What's the text type? And I have to do all these things. She said, no, 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 Funktionskonstanz, Funktionskonstanz. Just give me the equivalent, functional equivalence, all right? Although the theory wanted all these things to be checked and all these questions to be asked, in practice, she just wanted the equivalent, as many people still do from translations. Okay. We had lots of arguments about this at the time. And it was funny because I just agreed. I mean, they come in and say, oh, you know what, when we do something, it's for a purpose. I said, hey, I did my doctorate in sociology. Of course, why not? It's common sense. Okay. But all these other things were lacking. Now for my critical part. Does that agree with what you know of the theory? Have I said anything that contradicts your impression of Skopos theory? You're okay. So now I can attack it, right? Yeah. We agree what it is. Now we'll go. All right. This is not my criticism. This is from Andrew Chesterman, who's that man over there, and he gives this talk on YouTube, if you can find it, on Skopos theory, and he argues that it's not really a theory. Okay. Now consider these things that we've just said about Skopos theory, and I'll agree they're all pretty good things to say. Now, if I say the dominant factor in its translation, in a translation, is the purpose, am I describing what always happens? Or am I describing what should happen? Or am I describing what good translators do, and thereby separating good translators from bad translators? And how would I know? Okay? Especially when we're going to discuss who knows what the purpose is. Is it the client who knows, or the translator who knows? Okay? So that's my first question. Does it say what always happens, or what should happen? Can you answer that? Since you know Skopos theory? No? Neither could Christiane Nort when I asked her. Okay? If you can't do that, oh look, it's disappeared. Okay. And then Andrew Chesterman's critique is really this. If it's just describing something that happens, then it's not saying anything new. Okay? Can it predict what will happen? Can we say next year or in 10 years' time, or given condition A, B, C, and D, the translator will do this? Can it predict? No. Not really. Because it can't predict what the purpose is. It's to say, whatever you do, it'll be according to the purpose. Could a translator do something that's not according to the purpose? Perhaps for the client, but Vermeer actually says the translator decides what the purpose is, and Hans Menterie, even more so, says, it's her theory, the translator is the expert in cross-cultural communication. Her whole theory is based on translators being experts in getting communication across languages, working with clients who are seen as area experts. These are the people who are experts in whatever, biology or monetary policy or governance, or they are the diplomats. And she sees the translator's work as collaboration between two kinds of expertise. A very good theory, very beautiful theory. the fact. But if the translator is then the person who's deciding the purpose, all translators are always deciding the purpose, and we're not contributing anything new. And we can't predict it. We can't even test it. It's just, yeah, it's true, fine. Like God exists. Yeah, all right, that sounds good. Yeah, it works. So what is missing here is not, it's not the kind of theory that can be predictive, it's not the kind of theory that can be really tested in its own terms. And that's a pretty serious critique. I think we can save it though, because it is a theory in the sense of a model. It has a set of names for things. The names are new. It renames the area of translation and forces us to see it in a different way, even though it's not becoming a theory or in a strong predictive sense. Here's a very simple model of names for things. There are actions. Actions are determined by purposes, and they are in relation to instructions. Okay? And if you're doing an action, this is transformed into instructions, and they are transformed into a text, and that is transformed into a translation, and if you do all that correctly, that is transformed into money. Okay? This is a theory for translators working with clients, achieving cooperation between two kinds of expertise for mutual benefits. Money for the client, money for the translator. Perhaps even money for the source text author, who knows. It's an excellent theory because equivalence never talked about money. Didn't talk about clients. It's bringing in a whole lot of actual sociology here, which I was very happy about at the time, and I'm still quite happy about, to mention those things. I'll just mention a minor point of terminology before we move on. The text that we translate in English is traditionally called a source text, okay? And I want to start to call it a start text. And here is my reason. According to this theory, you don't just translate a text. You translate the text plus the instructions. Okay? And so I tell my class, when we do this Skopos lesson, I give them the theory, I say, whenever somebody gives you a text to translate, what do? You have to ask, why? Give me the reason. If you don't have the reason, how do you know how to translate? And then I say, if you're really professional, then you say, why and how much you pay me? Right? Okay, there's a negotiation that goes on prior to actually doing the job, and you have to talk about this at some point, since we're training professionals. Now, then in the second half of the class, it might happen, I'm going to get you to do some translating, I think. We'll see what happens. Okay? I give them a text, and they all translate it. Nobody asks why. Nobody asks how much you're getting paid. That's just, forget about it. Okay, now, you translate from the text plus the instructions, and these days, obviously, plus your translation memory, and plus the input of machine translation. So my simple point is that the text is no longer a source. A source is a metaphor, like the river comes out of the earth, and that's the source of the river, the origin. Not anymore. The text is one element alongside instructions, alongside glossary, alongside translation memory, alongside machine translation feed. All these things are on the translator's desk, all around us. When you translate, you must have these things on your desktop or in your mind. That's why I say start. This is just the place you start from with the process. It's by no means the source. When I say that, start text, I'm just translating German, Ausgangstext, French text de départ, Spanish, Italian. They all use start text. So I'm just putting that into English. nobody's following me, but still, I keep saying start text. Sometimes it might catch on somewhere. Okay, but that's the reason why I use that term. It seems to me, though, that if we work on that model, we can make it theoretical and we can turn it into something that can be tested. That is, we can start to put together a research paradigm, which is needed if we have translation studies. Now, if the principles of Skopos theory hold, it follows that the same text can be translated differently for different purposes. Right? And we can test that. And it follows that we could predict that this text with those instructions will give that kind of result. And we could turn it into a full theory that can be tested and predicted and interact with data and be refined, as happens in any kind of science. So I'm very interested in this particular question, and I'm interested in ways we can test it. I'm so interested that I test it in every class I give on Skopos theory. And I'm going to test it with you now. You guys can't see, can you? Can you? No. You're lucky. You're safe. I'm not going to ask any difficult questions. Okay? You can see, though. You're in trouble. Here's a text. It's a genuine text. It's from a, I don't know, from a newspaper, I think. And I give this text to my class and I say, translate it as an obituary in a major broadsheet newspaper in your language. I teach a class that has, at the moment, 7 languages going on. So we do multilingual translation practice classes. Okay? So we've got lots of things happening. So we'll do this. Here's your text. I want you to translate this text as an obituary to be published in a Chinese newspaper. A serious Chinese... Do you have obituaries in Chinese newspapers? Yes. Okay. Now just look at it and think for a while, or discuss. If work in 2s and 3s, I want you to come up with some of the things you would change in this text in order to fulfill that purpose. Okay? I'll give you 5 minutes. Discuss it and write down things you would change. Or do you want to just... No. Just do it like that. If you were in my class, I would get you to translate it. And I would look over your shoulder and laugh. No, I'm not doing that. I don't do that. Okay. Discuss it, and then I'll ask you for improvements to the text. Things you would change in the text. Shifts, transformations. For you people, I will read out the text, okay? Anna Chenot, we have a photograph of her here, was one of the most influential power brokers, hard word to translate, a power broker, of the 20th century. Also known as Chen Xiangmei, more or less. She was a stylish fixture on Washington, D.C.'s political circuit. Hard to translate. But also an unofficial diplomat who skillfully 20th century politics. Uh-oh, something's wrong. She met John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger, Deng Xiaoping, and Chiang Kai-shek. All were reportedly impressed by the woman dubbed by the Washington Post, what? As the legendary steel butterfly. Would you like that in your obituary? Steel butterfly? How does that sound in Chinese? Okay, take 2 minutes, sort out what you're going to change. Then I'll give you what my class says they will change. Are you talking? Okay, each pair of people, I want one thing that you would change. Okay? So if you get 3, you'll be safe. You might want to open a newspaper and see what an obituary looks like. Now there's seats over here. There's 2, 3. Okay, let's see. We'll just get some ideas. Go by yourself, that's it. One idea, please. Get to it. One thing you would change. No? Nothing? You're okay? Just give me one idea, please.
We are probably going to change some words to make it sound good for the people in the obituary. For example, things like power broker, or steel butterfly.
Okay, what will you do with power broker?
Probably we will change it into...
Well, what's wrong with power broker?
It's sort of have a little bit negative.
Yeah, it's a bit sort of, it goes with stockbroker.
Yes.
Somebody who buys and sells shares, right? And she's manipulating people, and it's a bit nasty for an obituary when we want to say nice things. So what would you say? Anything come to mind? No? No? Okay, keep thinking about it. One thing you would change, please. Yes?
I would change the format.
Yes?
There is a special form for the obituary.
Yes?
And then, yes, the whole thing such as, yes, in certain order.
Yep. Can you give me the order?
I just serve the...
Okay. But it's amazing, different cultures.
Yeah.
I know I have a Korean student, and he said, oh, we can't use that photo. It has to be a photo of her. You can't have those people. Who are those people? And he said, and the photo has to go on the left, and at the top it has to be in Chinese characters, because that's official, and then, you know. So he said, the elements are there, but there were things that he couldn't put in the obituary, like steel butterfly. Yeah?
I have a question, because I think you're saying we are using it for an obituary, but the tone we are using maybe is dependent on the position of the newspaper.
Yes?
I think if the newspaper is favorable and nice to this lady, maybe the tone is more positive.
Oh!
But if the newspaper is not nice enough, maybe if she is a pawnbroker, I will say she is a pawnbroker.
Good, so you'll have to ask the editor of the newspaper, do you want a nice obituary or a critical obituary? Okay. All right, that's pure Skopos. Okay. Other people. Let's see, over here, the 2 people there. One thing.
We would consider to change the way that we would write about a person's death. Usually in China, we don't have obituary for ordinary people. We have obituary for famous ones, including politicians.
She's pretty famous.
I know her. I know some stories about her and her husband.
Oh dear. Look at stories. Don't put the stories in the...
So usually in Chinese obituaries, we first name the person and followed by if possible, okay, if any, followed by a list of titles.
Yeah, I don't think she has any titles.
Yeah, and then a brief story.
Oh, wait. What's her name in the obituary?
Chinese.
Very good. Yeah,
Chinese.
I mean, it's logical, I think, to not use her Western name and to use her Chinese name. Yeah, so you wouldn't change that around. Probably mention the Western name as well, but certainly put the Chinese name first. Yes, anything else?
And usually in the obituaries we read, we would find the death time, the place, and also
yes.
the death.
Yes, but you can find that. You can go doing some searching and yeah. Do you mention her age when she died?
Yeah.
Yes, we do in English too. I find that frightening. Because everybody knows how old you are, but you doesn't matter. Yes, please, you have something. Yes.
Yes. Based on this text, I think I'll change the focus because the highlight is not on ordinary people she met. Look at these names: John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger, Deng Xiaoping. Those are important figures, in particular for the Sino-US relations. So the focus is we not just lose an ordinary person, we lose a connection between the two countries.
Yes.
Yes.
So would you keep those names?
Yes.
Good.
Keep this.
Yeah.
Maybe
Would you keep them in the same order? What order would
order
you put?
is very tricky.
I think Deng Xiaoping is still okay, isn't he? He can go. You can put him first.
He has to be first, like first name
Right.
the Chinese leaders and
Right.
then the foreign leaders.
Where does Chiang Kai-shek go? You put him somewhere. Bottom or
Maybe left out totally.
left out totally.
Yeah.
Consult the editor of your newspaper.
If it's on like a newspaper sponsored by the authority, it might be left out totally.
Yeah. And you probably find a few more Chinese people that she met. Chinese leaders, especially. Okay. All right. Yes, please.
Still the Washington Post.
Yes.
I think maybe we will use an official Chinese newspaper or other things to dub this woman.
Well, would an obituary refer to a newspaper as an authority? I mean, it just sounds strange to me, certainly to mention an American newspaper in a Chinese obituary is weird. Okay? If you can find some authority within Chinese culture, that would sound much better. And you may choose who wants to keep steel butterfly or not. Does it sound okay in Chinese?
Why not?
Why not? Okay, if it sounds fine. I mean, I don't know. Reminds me of there was a heavy rock group at the time called Iron Maiden. You know, this sounds like steel butterflies.
I think it draws an analogy of Margaret Thatcher, actually.
The Woman of Steel, very nice.
Yes. I think.
And she was more attractive than Margaret Thatcher, yes.
Yeah, so basically if we translate this title faithfully into Chinese, it may result in some kind of confusion because Margaret Thatcher is considered to be powerful and strong, unlike this lady apparently.
This lady was also powerful and strong, but behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the butterfly effect. Yes. Okay, well done. I think you would see that we would want to change a lot of the text. Here's a question for you. When we make those changes, are we still translating? No? Rewriting? That's okay. Are you going to get paid for it? If you're getting paid for it, then do it. But if you're getting paid by the word, like a normal translation, no way. You're working too hard. You have become a cross-cultural communication consultant. Okay, to produce a new text, pure Skopos theory, and the theory holds here. The same text can be rendered quite differently for a new purpose. Here's what my class in Melbourne changed, and you got most of them. So we put her Chinese name first. We left out DC, because that means nothing in most of the languages. Skillfully we left out or changed. We said with elegance, something like that. It seemed to go with power broker, and skillfully seemed to be too manipulative. So we wanted nice words for finding cooperation between, between powerful figures. We changed the order of the names, as you said. We left out the Washington Post, and we had a big debate about steel butterfly, but most people decided to keep it. Okay, so pretty good. We could even agree on the basic things to change, which makes this predictive. We're starting to get there. Now, same text for young. Sorry. And a very important thing. We changed the photo. Is that Deng Xiaoping?
Yes.
Put him in the middle. Keep everybody happy. Change the photo. You were talking yesterday about multimedia equivalents and things. I mean, you've got to think of the whole thing. Now, here's your mission. It's a history book for young teenagers. A history book for a 14-year-old. My son is 14. Okay, so I've done research on this one. What would you change now in this text? Just discuss it again between yourselves. What would you change in this text if it's going into a history book for 14-year-olds in China? And the people I didn't ask, I'm going to ask you now, so you better get some ideas about things to change. Okay, I'm going to cut it short because you got the general idea, and I think we're proving something that's quite obvious. In fact, at the back, please, what would you change? One thing.
Besides those things we have just discussed,
Well,
I think,
would you make all those changes?
maybe not, but I haven't thought about that yet. Yeah, but I think maybe one thing we'll add is some notes for some important figures.
Yes.
Because those teenagers may not have an information background.
Very good. So, can you give me an example of what you would do?
Like for John Kennedy, maybe we'll add what he's the U.S. president.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Good point. So you would use, somebody mentioned explicitation. This is classical explicitation, right? Knowledge that the English language reader would have, that's implicit, you make explicit. So you might say something like, she met US Presidents John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. Well, that covers them. All right. What about Deng Xiaoping? Oh, Kissinger? Secretary of State. Or why don't you just say the influential Secretary of State. Explicitation? Not necessary. I don't know, up to you. I tried it with my 14-year-old son. I said, do you recognize these people? He said, Kennedy, was he something? He sort of knew Kennedy was president of the United States. He couldn't say when, but you know. The others, nothing. Okay, he's 14. He's a gamer. I mean, you know, if Deng Xiaoping comes in a video game, then he'll know. Not at the moment. So for this 14-year-old, certainly we had to use explicitation for everybody, perhaps not Kennedy, but if you've got Nixon and Kennedy, they're both US presidents, so it's easy to do, okay? So certainly explicitation. Anything else you would change? I was asking people at the back there. So these three very active people here. One idea, what would you change? Anything? Yes, for example.
For a 14-year-old teenager, maybe the Washington Post, I don't know if he cares about it. Maybe just in general, the Western media.
He doesn't care about print. Yeah, what would you do with it?
Maybe change it to a more general term, that like the Western media.
Yes,
As
for China, for a Chinese reader, the Western media,
yeah.
if you like, yes, that would be fine. Although, it's a history book, one of its functions is to teach people. So this is why the explicitation is very good. It has a pedagogical function as well. Mind you, it's perhaps a disconcerting detail. So perhaps you would just leave it out or generalize. Okay. So the strategy with the names would be explicitation. So the strategy with the newspaper would be generalization. Okay. Anything else? Both of those I classify as density change, by the way. Just changing the amount of density per stretch of text. So to make it more readable or understandable, you give the same information but stretch it over more text. Density change. Okay, let's see what they did. They kept the same photo. We did some work to find out who that is. We think it's Henry Kissinger Young, but we're not sure. Some of you could probably find that more better than me. It's not her husband. We found photos of her husband. Okay. Okay. And we decided to keep Steel Butterfly because we thought that was fun. You know, people would like that sort of cool reference to her. Okay. And that's it. That's it. So we can show that in this case, the same text can be rendered very differently for two different purposes. But we've picked two very different purposes. We've really forced the issue. Okay. In this case, are you translating or rewriting?
Explain.
Yeah, there's no break point. I mean, you know, you could say explicitation is part of normal translation practice, but if you're doing it for 5 people and editing it, then you're doing a bit more. But within the Skopos approach, there is a continuum. Okay, and it really depends on whether you're getting paid by the word or paid by the hour. Okay, or paid for your expertise, which is the other. In the Skopos paradigm, we would like translators and interpreters to get paid for their expert time, not the number of words. Simply because you're making decisions that are above the level of word counts. Which also helps us with machine translation, because the quantity of words, that's done by the machine. These kinds of decisions cannot be handled by machine translation. Okay? And that's the interest of Skopos. Any questions on that? That's a pedagogical illustration. How many of you have done professional translations? 2, 3, 4, right, very brave people. Do your clients usually give you instructions?
Yes.
Do your clients, who else had your hand up? Yes? Do your clients give you instructions?
No.
Did your last client give you instructions for a particular job?
I haven't been doing translation for many years.
That's my point. That's
But
my
I've done
point.
that.
Yes, no?
Yeah.
No. Who else had their hand up? Very brave people. Yes? Do your clients regularly give instructions?
Not regularly.
No.
Yeah.
Who else?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah, but most times, most often, I will ask for instructions.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you're a
Because I want
Skopos.
to know the purpose. And,
You're a real activist Skopos. Yes. Good. My experience is like what you were saying. I work with clients for a long time. If I've worked with them for 5 or 10 years and I get a text, I know what it's for.
Yes.
I know where it's going. You know, the text tells me a lot about it, and I know their business. That's why I work with them. That's why they work with me. So the fact of the instructions is important if it's not obvious. Okay? If they gave you that text and said, hey, it's for an obituary, and you say, look, I'm sorry, we have to rewrite the text. And you become a consultant in that sense. The 14-year-old one, though, has happened to me. I got an encyclopedia to translate once from Spanish into English to be sold. It's a whole big thing, so I didn't do it. I have a team of translators who do it, and then I coordinate the work as a project manager. Now, I didn't get good instructions, but it was pretty obvious to me it was for kids, okay, for this age kids, with very good illustrations, because the publishing industry in Barcelona, where I worked, has great graphic design, and then the languages just change. Okay, so the instructions are usually, it has to be exactly the same length, because it has to fit in with the illustrations. Now, we had, this one sentence stays in my mind. This, I'm coming to the ethics problem. The sentence was, I translate word for word, the white man has led human progress for the last 2,000 years. I repeat, the white man has led human progress for the last 2,000 years. It was like that in Spanish, and so that's what my translator put in English. And I revised it, but I didn't pay attention to it because it was grammatically correct. And it went off out into the world. When you translate into English, you don't know who your client, your reader is. That's one of the other problems. Do we know where it goes? It goes off, they sort it out. And it got to a publisher in Taiwan. And the publisher said, yes, I'm interested in this book, we would like to do it, we can publish it with the English text, which is great, but we cannot accept this, and there's a whole list of other ideological problems. And the publisher wrote back and said, well, this sentence you see here, this one right here, he didn't say it's sexist, but he should have. So it's got the white man and women, okay? And he said, well, you know what, it's not true. Because he said, for 1,000 years, Chinese people led human progress. And I have this entire list of great discoveries like gunpowder, spaghetti, or pasta, paper, yeah, paper, big progress, printing,
Compass.
got wide, all this stuff. And I have to look at it and say, look, why didn't you tell me it was going there? We would have edited out all these contentious things. Okay? And the client says, quite honestly, we don't know where it's going. So we send it out, and then they make the changes that they need later on. Oh dear. Anyway, that letter I had to translate from English into Spanish to go to the author, who was a prime Spanish fascist, as I summarize. And he wrote back in Spanish, saying he didn't care about paper or spaghetti. Think of the glory of Gothic cathedrals. Mind you, I'm mentioning this as Notre Dame. Yeah, there is something to do with that. But anyway, you know, and West, it was so racist on both sides. That is the only time in my life that I have said, I refuse to translate. That this is not going anywhere. This discussion between the publisher and the author, they will never agree on anything. I'm not going to let them communicate. Okay, there was no cooperation possible. I couldn't see any purpose to my translation, and so I refused to translate. All right? I'm trying to get to ethical considerations, and in these extreme cases, you can see that there are ethical issues involved, and that the notion of purpose might contain a germ of wisdom. I'll come to that in a minute. I have another activity I want to go through though with you. Do I have time for it? I hope so. Okay. I was just giving you this. You can imagine the problem, the ethical problem, when you have a text and you're told not to translate it or to edit it out. For example, it's not I've concocted a text, but it's a very similar situation to something I've faced. I've had a text that's incredibly critical about Australia, and the editor says, really, can you tone it down? Can you please not render it this way? And I have to think, what's the purpose? Is the purpose what this person is telling me to do? What would you do? What would you do if you were Australian and you had a text criticizing the history of Australia, which is a very bad history in this respect? Would you say, yes, that's okay, I'll change it? Okay, Skopos suggests that, yes, you do whatever you're told to do. Okay? For people who believe the client rules. Christiane Nort, who is engaged in teaching very much, will say the client's instructions are what you should fulfill. Others, Hans Vermeer and Justa Holtzbenteri, will say, no, the translator decides what the purpose is. And I have to look at that and think, why am I doing this translation? What effect is it going to have? Is it going to do any good? Should I translate this or not? Should I translate it? Who says yes, translate that and be critical of Australia? Who says no, don't translate it? Who has no idea? Sure, I translate that. Of course I do. Of course I do. If you don't know who is criticizing your culture, you can't get your culture to engage with them and to understand other opinions. Of course I translate that. And I do so referring to the local code of ethics, which says you shall not change or tone down critical texts. This is the ethics in Australia. Okay? And I think that's one of the purposes of translation, is to bring into a culture opposing views, views that oppose it, so that people have a realistic image of their place in the world. Mind you, my fellow Australians don't like that text, and I can translate it, but it's probably edited out later on by somebody else in a newspaper or in a book. But for me, I can decide that that is one of the purposes of the translation. It's quite difficult, the ethics of purpose. You have to decide who has the right. I think I'll move on. Yeah. I'm going to suggest that there is a basis for that kind of decision, that there might be an ethics associated with purpose, but I'm going to do it on the basis of this example. Okay? Now, this takes half an hour. Have I got half an hour? No. Yeah. Yes. This is interpreting. At last for the interpreters. I forgot about it. Okay? This is from a paper published by Daniel Gilles, whom you might have heard of, in which he did a very interesting experiment. He got, I think, 6 conference interpreters, and he got them to render this reply. This is the first half of it. It's longer. Right? This is an example. Once, recorded it, and then twice. Okay? The same interpretation was done twice. And he's wanted to see how they distributed their effort the second time. And it's very interesting because the second time they do it, there's less surprise, they sorted out some terminological problems, and they'll have more free time, in theory. And so Danielle's paper points out that in the second time, they used their free time to address different problems, that they were always at full operating capacity, and he calls that the tightrope hypothesis. Interpreters, conference interpreters, have no free time. If you've got a bit of spare or cognitive time, you use it to solve other problems, which implies the first time round you don't solve all the problems. Okay. Very interesting paper. Now, I looked at it and I was intrigued because he evaluated the renditions and he counted up the number of errors, fair enough, and omissions. And I looked at this and I said, Daniel, omissions aren't errors. Well, often they are, but some omissions are not errors. Some omissions are quite logical things that interpreters do in order to get the operating space. Okay? So my paper was on omissions, particularly on omissions and how they operate, why they're made, why sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. Daniel doesn't like my paper very much. Okay? I think he's an excellent researcher, one of the few excellent people who've put interpreting studies on the map and given it an empirical basis. All that's great. And my paper was published in a homage to him, a festschrift, all right? So, you know, I thought I was saying, Dave, I really like your paper, and I really want to just add a few things to it, you know. He didn't like it. No. Okay, now, it's an interview. There's a journalist asking a question. The interviewee has just become CEO, the director of Kodak. Kodak is the company that makes cameras and film. It used to. I guess it still does in the age of digital technologies. You can't see it, can you? I'll read it for you, okay? Question, says the journalist. You suggested that through Kodak you can manipulate technology and... Oh, I can't see this at all. And with this information revolution, can you be more specific about the kinds of products that Kodak will eventually be able to produce? Same question. Please just come in, tell us more about this revolution and the kinds of products. The interviewee replies, I'm sure I don't even know these people yet, but I know scientists and engineers well enough to know that they would not be very happy if I pre-announce products. But since I don't know all the products are, I can speak loosely, I guess. Let's stop there. What's the purpose? What's the purpose of this test? Any ideas? It's an interview. You're all really smart people. Oh, you've got the answer, you know the answer. What's the purpose, please? Lady in Red. It's a song, Lady in Red.
The purpose of this answer?
Yes, the purpose of this bit of language. Okay. Consider, you're a journalist, you're interviewing a new director of a company, you want to get the interview. How will you know it's a good interview? What will make it successful?
Get useful information.
What kind of information?
and latest products.
You want new information, right? Because nobody's going to read old stuff. That's not what journalists do. Journalists are there for news, and news is new information. So the journalist has one purpose. I want this person to reveal something. Now, you are the CEO of a new company, you've just come in, and this person's asking you about new products. What's your purpose? Do you want to give this person new information?
No.
No, because those are called industrial secrets. Okay? So, one person wants something, the other person can't really give that something. But they can give something else. What else can they give? Look at the language used. What kind of stuff can they give?
There are new things, but I can't tell you what they are.
Yeah, right. It has to sound like, you know what? It's so exciting. There's this revolution on. We're doing new products, and I'll give you some technical names, some technical that you could write down and put in your article, so it sounds like I really know what I'm talking about. And at the end, the interview goes on. He says, "At night, I lay awake in bed with dreaming up new ideas. Most don't work, but if 10% do, they're real killers. You know, like, I'm a creative guy with new ideas, but I'm not going to give you any ideas." Two opposing purposes. Okay? New, not new. But they can cooperate to produce something that sounds new-ish. Okay? There is a mid-ground here between the two aspirations. And I said the word cooperate, and that's what most interests me here. I think that purposes in communication are very, very difficult to locate, never pure, always have to be interpreted, and are always different for different people. And you learn a lot just by looking at the way they intonation. Now, in my analysis, assuming that kind of analysis, this is where Daniel Gilles doesn't like what I do. He says, I have no scientific basis for assuming these purposes, because I can't ask them, what's your purpose? Well, wait a minute, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Doesn't the text tell you what their purpose is? Isn't that clear enough? Okay, now that's one problem. Now, I think that, okay, these are the purposes, yeah, and there is a thing they call the cooperative purpose, produce something fresh, exciting, and authoritative, right? Now, in that text, some parts are really important for achieving that purpose, okay? Or more to the point, they're good, they're really important for avoiding the risks. What are risks? Risks is the probability of non-successful communication. The risk is, journalist has nothing new, not good. Industrial secrets are revealed, good for the journalist, bad for the company, not good. Boring, unlikely, or false, not good. Okay, so you want to avoid those. Go through the, and it could be too technical. Okay, so we want a bit of technical language, but not a whole lot, because it's a journalist, obviously for a business audience in this case. Now, I think any interpreter would omit pieces that are low risk. Some parts of the text are going to be high risk, because if they're not there, or if there's a mistake in them, the whole thing falls down. But a lot of it is low risk. Hesitations and false starts are regularly omitted. Any interpreter would do that. Okay? And especially here, when he's correcting himself, he says visual memories or visual images. You would just pick up the visual images and forget the self-correction. This is a way you buy time to do simultaneous work. Okay? So far, so good. Those are very low-risk items. you can sacrifice them, no problem. But I want to propose that all that bit of the text is also low risk. Interpreters could omit things or transform things, perhaps dubiously, in those parts of the text, and the communication would still be successful. Those are the low risk. And the red bits, on my analysis, are high risk. If you mess those up, people are not going to be happy, the communication is not going to work so well. So I'm developing a risk theory here where texts are unequal on the basis of purpose. If you get the purpose, you can figure out the risks of success or non-success and go through the text and see that some parts of the text are high risk, others are low risk. We know this with professional translators. They work hard on the high risk bits and go fast on the low risk bits.